All right, everyone. So Bruce talked a lot about how trauma doesn't have to define who you are, and sometimes you can make mistakes, but you're just not who you're supposed to be yet. So our next speaker is going to talk about that, the weight that they've learned to carry.
How's everybody doing? All right. I'm A1C Gabriel Fraley. I'm structured by trade, but I work for currently needs in the squadron right now. I've learned a lot over there. I guess I'll just start from the beginning. So my mom was in the military. She did 23 years in the Air Force. She was a 4N. So her job was always just about, helping people serve in the hospital. She met my dad when they were in tech school, and she had me when she was in California. That was her first duty station. My dad got kicked out of the military for fighting and drinking, so I tried not to go down that path. I tried to follow hers a little bit more. But I was born in California, Travis Air Force Base, so was my sister. And after that, we ended up moving to South Carolina, so I lived in Sumter for a few years as well. And during that time, especially once I got a little bit older, because I was probably around 7, 8, or 9 during those few years that we were there, is when I tried to, figure out like why it was just me, my sister, and my mom. And during that time, my dad found, another wife. He had got another family and stuff. And it kind of makes you think like, is that your fault? Is that someone else's fault? And you kind of try to learn how to cope with something like that as a child, because you don't really know anything yet. And I dealt with that for a little bit, and I learned how to cope a little bit more. But as time went on, my dad got addicted to drugs, so he was doing crack, meth, stuff like that. And it was noticeable because during some of those times I was there, and it's kind of strange to be, 9 years old and seeing your dad or your stepmom like high on crack or something like that. I don't really think any kid should go through something like that, but sometimes it's just the cards are dealt. But it kind of made me feel like some of that was kind of my fault in a way. So going through California, going through South Carolina, and then finally making my way to Misawa in Japan, that was our next base. That's when I finally started trying to figure out, what did I like, instead of always worrying about factors that I couldn't really control. And during that time, it was kind of hard to make friends. My mom's Black, my dad is white. He's from West Virginia, my mom's from North Carolina. So it's like two very different worlds. It's not the same. And during my time when I was younger in school and stuff, I never really had a lot of friends, especially when I would go back. My mom got deployed while we were in Misawa, because we were there during the 2011 earthquake that had happened. So it was pretty big. And I went back home to stay with my grandparents, and I went to school there, and I couldn't make a lot of friends. I didn't look like everybody else. I didn't have the same background as everybody else. I couldn't really relate to anybody, so I never really had friends that I could say were actually friends during that time. And for a long time, it made me feel like that I couldn't really relate to anyone, at least my age. So I kind of stuck to myself. And during the time when I was in Misawa, especially towards the end, I started trying to play sports and stuff. So I tried to find different ways to be a part of something that wasn't just, playing video games by yourself or going on walks by yourself or just doing anything by yourself. You need a little bit of human interaction in your life. And I started to play basketball. I was terrible at basketball at first. I was horrible. And then during that time where I first started playing, I found a way to be passionate about something that took my mind off of everything, and that's all I worried about all the time. 100% of the time, it was just basketball. So once I left Japan, I finally moved to Ramstein and started middle school there. And that was when I made a promise to myself that no matter whatever's going on at home, family-wise, that I would try to be the best at anything that I did. And I chose basketball, and that's what I put all of my time towards, whether that was being at the gym an hour early for, morning practice, if our coach was there, or staying an hour after practice in the afternoon. I had to make sure, even if I wasn't the most skilled person on the team, I had to make sure that no one could outwork me in any way, shape, or form. And I made sure of that. And during that time, especially in high school, as you get a little bit older, you tend to think about things a little bit harder. And it was going back and thinking about my dad and my family and stuff, and seeing how things would go by and how the time went by. I always had to ask the question, like, why isn't what I do enough for somebody that I look up to, even if I don't really know them that well? And it kind of eats you up a little bit, because you can never really get a straight answer, especially when you don't really know the whole story. And for me, it was something that I held really deeply, and I started to kind of despise my dad a lot. Sometimes he'd forget my birthday. Sometimes he wouldn't remember that either. So it was just certain things kind of led to me, I want to say hate, but you tend not to like that type of person. And I used that as fuel for my passions, and it worked out pretty well for me. I ended up being Dodd's All-European first team. I was MVP for my team. If I had to say, I was one of the best players that ever came out of Ramstein. You can Google that if you want to. But I was pretty good. And finally, once I got to my senior year, I had to make a decision on, whether or not I was going to keep playing basketball, or just go to school, get a job. I knew I didn't want to join the Air Force. I was not going to do that. I was against that wholeheartedly. My mom tried, but I wasn't going for it. And I finally was just like, you know what, I want to keep playing basketball. And I made that transition, and my first community college was in Maine, so I was in New England. And it's different. Being an athlete, I know some people can relate to that when you go from one thing and go to another thing, that the transition might not always be what you think it is. Going from high school to college, it's kind of like the real world, so you don't really know what to expect. And I got there and I realized that, everyone's either just as good as you, if not better than you, and everyone wants to play. So basketball was always competitive, but it got to another degree at that point. But going to college, I definitely started being around people who didn't align with my moral compass and my values and stuff like that. People doing drugs, or people, committing crimes, or doing something that you try to stay away from, because you learn from people who are close to you, their past experiences and their setbacks and stuff. And during that time, I think that a lot of it rubbed off on me in the wrong ways. And I started to fall down that hole a little bit, where I was definitely doing things I should not have been doing. And I finally got to a point where basketball wasn't the most important thing when it should have been, especially me coming back to the States. And that was the whole reason you were there in the first place. So I got in trouble my first year of college for doing things I wasn't supposed to do. And I left, and that was during COVID, so that was 2019. Going into 2020, I found another school to go to play basketball. Went there, met some of my best friends there, but it was still, at that time, I was still trying to juggle like what I actually wanted out of life and what was actually important, because it seemed like basketball was still there, but other things and other factors always seemed to have gotten in the way. And during that time, my grandpa had died. My dad had lost his job, so he was living in a mobile home in West Virginia with my sister, so he didn't have any money. Sometimes he'd ask me for money. So it was hard, because you have other things that seem like they hold more weight than the stuff that you have going on right in front of you. So nothing in the present ever felt like it was meaningful. And during that time is when it got really bad for me. I started getting into more trouble. I got into fights, going out and partying, not going to practice, not going to class. I was failing class. When I first got there, I had really good grades. I had a 3.5, and then it went all the way down to like a 2.2. So nothing was resonating with me, that the stuff that should have been high priority, it just wasn't there. And I think with the stress factors that I had back at home, it only ignited it a little bit more. And I finally was just kind of like, nothing else really matters. My family doesn't matter. School doesn't matter. Basketball doesn't matter. It's always just about me and what I want. And what I wanted wasn't good for me, but I wouldn't listen to the people around me. And finally, I finally had my son, and then that's when things changed for me, because now I'm in a situation where I can't be the person that I despised for all those years to someone who matters the most to me. And I had to really adjust and look at myself, like really look at myself in the mirror and figure out, like, what are you going to do and how are you going to be different? And it definitely was a life changer. Even after I left school, you know, I went back to Georgia because that's where my family was staying at that point. And I was doing odd-end jobs. Like I worked at UPS, I worked at Jimmy John's all at the same time. I worked at FedEx warehouse, going in at 4 a.m. and leaving at 10, throwing boxes on trucks and stuff. Door dashing. I lived on the east side of Atlanta, so I was near like Lithonia and Decatur. So I was just trying to find any means to do anything and make sure that my son had diapers, he had food, and I was, you know, doing everything that I was supposed to be doing to make sure that he was okay. And that's when my mom came back and got my ear, and she was like, "You sure you don't want to join the Air Force?" Like maybe. And I was just like, it seems like that's my only choice at this point, because, you know, it's good that I can make money, but at the same time, I can't even feed myself half the time if I'm just making money to go towards one particular thing. I got to make sure I'm stable for my family. And I finally pulled the trigger, and I went and talked to a recruiter. He was like, "Do you want to do security forces?" I was like, "Absolutely not." He was like, do you want to do maintainer? I was like, "No." And he was like, "All right, look, I'll put you on a list where you just wait. I'll give you a phone call, and whatever's open is open if you want it." And I missed the first phone call. I was going to be a firefighter. I missed that, so kind of sucks. But he called me back again, and he was like, "I have this job called structures," and I think he kind of blew smoke a little bit. He was like, "Yeah, you'll be building buildings and stuff. You know, you'll build bases from the ground up." 99% of the job is not that. You do some of that, but it's not all of it. So I was like, "Yeah, that sounds cool. You know, I don't want to work on planes, and I don't want to work at the gate. So I think that's my best bet right now." And I finally did that, and I went to BMT on 9/11. You can believe that. So it was my first day. I was the only person on the bus going to Black. I was the one person on the bus, and the MTI you got on didn't even have the energy to yell at me. I thought BMT was a joke at that point, because no one watched all these videos, and it wasn't that. But I finally went through all of that. I got through BMT. I got through tech school. I was 4th highest grade or 5th highest grade in my class for that, and finally made it here. And I think now, being in the position that I'm in, after all of that, that I can let go of a lot of that hostility and resentment that I held for my dad and for myself, because I did a lot of things that I shouldn't have, and I was really hard on myself. And I think if I could tell anybody anything, or if they could take anything from this, is that you are your number one enemy, and the decisions you make are based on what you want to do and not something that someone else makes you do. You know, making a situation worse and saying that it was based on this or that, I think that it's kind of a deflection tool, and that's not healthy, because then you go through life thinking that everything is everybody else's fault except yours. So I had to find a lot of responsibility in myself during that time and now to, you know, if I do something wrong, that's on me. I can take that on the chin and, you know, grow from that and be a better person from it. But it was definitely a step that I had to take that was a hard one, because for a long time it just didn't seem like I was ever going to get out of it. But now I'm here, and, you know, I think I'm doing decent for myself, hopefully. And I just want to make sure that I'm the person I want to be for my son, because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. The Air Force is awesome, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that reason. And I feel like everyone has to have a bigger reason to do something than just themselves, because that's not going to ever be enough, especially if something's really important, at least in my opinion. But yeah.